Welcome to Distribution Talk with Jason Bader, the show where we dive into the stories, struggles, and solutions from business owners and thought leaders in the wholesale distribution market. Hey folks, Jason here. In this episode, I had the opportunity to speak with Michael Delgado. And Michael is the founder of a software called Canals AI. Canals really focuses on the workflow challenges that we have in distribution. And what it's really looking at is those things that bog us down. And, we spent a lot of time talking about quoting and the process of creating quotes, but it could be anything to receiving material, to procurement, all kinds of different applications that we have in distribution that really just are a time suck, if you will, to our productivity. And what they're focusing on is using machine learning to try to automate those processes and to create better ways to handle that workflow so that humans can get on to what they're really good at, and judgment and discernment and looking at situations and creating a better customer experience and all of those things that machines just aren't very good at. It was a great conversation and a very interesting background as well, and how he got involved in distribution. And I'm always fascinated with how entrepreneurs look at our industry, those who come from very far afield, and they look at our industry and they start learning about what we do, things that we take for granted, or maybe things that we've just kind of been born into, and the challenges we've kind of accepted over the years, that they look at and say, I think you don't have to do that anymore. And it's kind of an epiphany for all of us, like, oh, really? We don't have to do that? Anyway, that's really what this software, Canals, is attempting to solve. And, they're learning and they're getting better and better at it all the time. So I hope you enjoy the episode. I really enjoyed speaking with Michael. This episode of Distribution Talk is sponsored by InSQL Distribution Software. InSQL is a fully functional distribution-based software package, and these folks do it very well at a price point many smaller distributors can afford. Another thing I like about this company is they do it all in-house. They take on these applications and build them into the platform using state-of-the-art Microsoft technology. No third-party bolt-ons for them. This is important because when you need technical assistance, they are the single point of contact. If you're ready to step up to a fully loaded, scalable distribution package at an affordable price, look no further than InSQL Distribution Software at www.insql.com. That's INXSQL.com. Well, hey, Michael, welcome to Distribution Talk. Thanks for taking the time to be with me.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
You bet. My pleasure. So if you could, let's just talk a little bit about your background and how eventually you wound your way over to distribution, but at least let's go a little earlier. So let's go the nickel tour.
Yeah, sure. I've been in the tech business building software for almost 10 years now. And before that, depending on how far back you want to go, I was a corporate lawyer on Wall Street. And so my first foray into tech was when I left the law firm where I was an associate to join the founding team of a startup called Willing. And that was basically TurboTax for estate planning.
Okay.
So simple web app experience where the average consumer can go and answer questions in a user-friendly interface and create an estate plan. And estate plans are, of course, legal documents. And I joined this company early as the lawyer. So it was a very big role. And as happens in early stage startups, I ended up doing much more than my original title contemplated. And so in addition to the legal, I became our product manager and I led building the product that's been used to make millions of estate plans. And after several years, that company was acquired by MetLife. But in that time, that's really where I cut my teeth as a founder and as a software builder. Mm-hmm. So in 2022, coming up on almost 2 years now, the stars were aligned where I was in a place that I wanted to and could start Canals, which is AI for distributors. So how did I get here? So the idea actually, it came right from home, specifically from my wife, who runs an automotive parts distributor, which she founded. And from time to time, I would help her set up software tools to automate this or that workflow for her business. Mm-hmm. And it piqued my interest. And I'd visit her warehouse and kind of look around and just see miles and miles of other warehouses. And I started talking to other distributors and learning about the biggest pain points in their businesses. I started to see what it's funny, what everybody in the industry, the wholesale distribution industry, takes for granted. But I was learning for the first time, distribution is really just like this huge and hugely important market, right? So that's interesting if you're an entrepreneur and someone who
Yeah, sure.
builds software. And the software in the market, I learned that distributors were using is generally leaving a lot of their needs unaddressed, even just from a regular software perspective, right? Before you even get to thinking about AI,
Hmm.
there's a lot of needs that these folks were sharing with me that were unaddressed by their existing tools. And then you do get to the AI. I'd been keeping up with the advances there. And
Sure.
again, the stars were aligned where I just got to really high conviction in the opportunity presented by bringing the power of AI to wholesale distribution. And that's the mission of Canals.
Yeah, and I appreciate that
Yeah.
kind of the journey on getting into distribution. But if I could go back for a second here and going back to when you left the Wall Street firm,
Mm-hmm.
did you always want to be in tech, even when you were in law school and you were studying? Was tech kind of the thing on the radar, or was it no, I'm going to practice law, whatever law comes my way, whatever corporate issue comes my way, or
Yeah. So I did not know that I did not always want to be in tech. I think, when I was in college, I studied neuroscience, for example. At that time,
Mhm.
I was interested in medicine. I was always somewhat interested in business, but tech wasn't really on my radar. I grew up in New Jersey on the East Coast, right? Maybe if I grew up in the Bay Area, it would have been more on my radar. I would have been
Perhaps, yeah.
surrounded by folks in that world, but I wasn't. And so I was more interested in hard things to be sure, right? Medicine and sort of business generally, but not so much tech. At the same time, though, I didn't go to law school and then practice law thinking I'm going to be a partner at a Wall Street law firm and this is going to be my career. I hadn't ruled it out, but I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do. I always saw law, and I think this kind of played out pretty correctly as a really interesting springboard or vantage point into seeing and doing a lot of interesting stuff. In
Yeah.
my law firm, it was, not to be obnoxious about it, but it was an elite law firm. And so you get to be in the room for some cool stuff. And it sort of lets you see a lot really fast that you might not otherwise see. And one of the things that I saw was I felt like I really related a lot more to maybe some of the clients that we were serving who were maybe selling their businesses, right? Or
Mm.
just
Yeah.
doing big deals that moved a lot of value and changed a lot of lives. And you see these risk-taking folks who had built businesses over long periods of time, and they were now engaged in these like really exciting transactions. And I felt like the conclusion that I came to was like, okay, so
Mhm.
what's going on here? So we've got the partners at this law firm make a ton of money. They are as smart as you can possibly be, and they are as hardworking as you could possibly be. And then you've got the clients, the entrepreneurs or the operators of businesses. They're also kind of as hardworking as you could possibly be. They're also very smart, and maybe in some different ways than the way that lawyers are smart, but
Mhm.
still very smart, right? So what's the difference? Like, what is it about their lives or at least what I can see of their lives or their professional lives that's resonating with me? The difference is risk.
Yeah.
And those folks were comfortable with risk. And I felt like, I think I'm comfortable with risk.
Yeah.
And if that's true about me, then hopefully I'm smart. I know I'm hardworking. Maybe I can try and see what's going on in the business world. And the
Mhm.
opportunity, as I said, to join that early stage legal tech startup called Willing kind of presented itself. And so I seized it because I'd come to that conclusion. And I felt like if an opportunity to take risk comes my way and it feels like taking the right kind of risk and a big and exciting opportunity, I resolved that I would really consider it, and I did, and I ended up taking the opportunity. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that distinction because I have a lot of friends that are attorneys and very smart, very talented in their profession and from an advisory standpoint phenomenal. Can think up things that no, some of us who tend to be more entrepreneurial would never think of. We just don't. But then it's that risk side, and I'm glad you nailed that. That really put into perspective because I see them that will talk about their practice and oh, I'm thinking about doing this or that, and there's a lot of I'm thinking about, not not I'm willing to jump in and do it, and that's
Man,
really an interesting perspective. But and it's no knock on attorneys. It really is
no,
not.
no,
It's just or certain
those are
professions.
my best friends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but if there's one recurring theme in a lot of my conversations, there's a lot of I'm thinking about for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. And look, in case it's interesting to hear about this, why? What might be the reason why I'm comfortable with risk? I'm a first generation American.
Yeah.
So my mom came from Cuba, my dad's family came from Ecuador, and so, I think that things were never maybe so nice and neat or so like perfectly packaged where I came to rely
Yeah.
on the neatness of the identity that comes with a profession and the right law firm and all these things, because it was like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of good without that. Whereas I think some of my friends from the legal days who remain my very good friends now, maybe do find a lot of comfort in that identity that comes with things
Yeah.
being more sort of neat, if you will. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that. It's just a matter of, right, what you need to sort of be comfortable and energized and so on.
Yeah, I grew up in a certain way, don't want to screw that up. And I'm going to
Yeah.
continue on that
Yeah.
path. I mean, no, I get that. I really do. I
Yeah.
know a lot of, second and third generation people, and this happens in distribution quite a bit, family businesses that sometimes that second and third generation aren't as willing to take risk because, they grew up, they got the college paid for, had some nice
Yeah.
things, growing up and they don't want to screw it up. So they are not as willing to like throw it all on the line and go for it. It's an interesting perspective, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, I think that's really something that yeah, it started to resonate with them because I was a second generation in my family business, and there were things I did not want to screw up, and I was very
Yeah.
cautious about things, and so that's really interesting. And I think also, looking at your wife's business, this distribution business, as you said. Distribution is very vast, and it's also kind of under the radar. It's kind of quiet. It's not flashy. We don't advertise. We don't talk about it. It's not like until post pandemic, supply chain distribution was not on the radar, and all of a sudden it became on the radar. People are like, well, what is this thing that you do? And it's like, this is kind of it. We're pretty easy going here, but it's
Yep.
big.
Yep. It's big.
It's a big, big deal. As you say, rows and rows of warehouses. And, what do all these people do? And how do these folks make a living inside of each one of them? I'm curious, though, you mentioned that you interviewed and you talked to people. How did you go about that interviewing process to really find those needs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so some of it was, well, if you mean like the mechanics of finding folks, I mean, some of that was just kind of in person, going to conferences, approaching folks dead cold.
Yeah,
Hey, can I have a minute of your time?
sure.
Right. That whole
Sure.
thing. Very, I think challenging, humbling.
Was it automotive conferences you went to, or what kind of conferences?
No, it was electrical.
Okay.
Yeah, to give
Okay.
you an idea. So that was one approach to sort of getting the time of folks who I felt like might have helpful information for understanding whether and how big of an opportunity there was. But another was just cold outreach on LinkedIn. Hey, I see you're a COO or a VP of this or that at this wholesale distribution shop. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm exploring the space, and not it's not 100% conversion rate on those messages, but some folks who are kind of just curious, right, and have the time,
Yeah.
right place, right time, you just catch them. And so that's how I got in front of people. And, as far as the questions that I would ask to learn about their challenges, I always tried to take a very like blank canvas approach, because you don't want something that I think can be very hard about entrepreneurship if you're not careful is like, nobody wants to be mean, right? So if you go shopping around an idea, like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this thing, right? Like it could
Yeah.
be such a bad idea, and a lot of people will be very encouraging, because it's just very hard to tell someone who is very earnest and excited about this thing that they've been thinking so hard about and are so excited about. Actually,
Yeah.
that's like just really not a good idea, right? So you kind of contaminate the learning if you come out too strong with suggestions, or do you like this or do you like that? And so I didn't do that. Instead, I would just sort of ask about what are some areas of your business where you feel like the software isn't quite getting you to where you need to go, or where you feel like you're hearing from your team things that should be possible, or that it would be amazing to have be possible if only, and so on. And really just through asking lots of questions like that, and then asking all the follow-up questions to go down to the nth degree, that's basically how I sort of built a picture of the various pieces of a wholesale distribution business that were common across different verticals, different businesses, different verticals. And then from there ultimately started to say like, okay, so here are the problems. Here are some of the specific ones where I think software, and then in particular AI, can really make a difference in ways that maybe weren't possible some time ago, or even if they were probably just too difficult, really, without extraordinary resources.
Okay. Okay. The reason I'm curious about that, obviously, this is what I do. I mean, I ask a lot of questions. I meet people in distribution. I ask a ton of questions, and I am always curious how people study distribution or learn about it coming from, really no experience whatsoever. I mean, I was born into it. So, I mean, this is kind of the way my life has been, but it is always, kind of fascinating for me how somebody studies the distribution industry and gets curious about that industry and meets different people and pulls things. And it's interesting, you said you went out on LinkedIn, kind of a cold, hello, I'm thinking about doing this. And but I've had those calls. I mean, I've had those emails, and I remember you just kind of jogged my memory. I spoke to a young guy who was still at Stanford, and his parents had also been in the, God, I think it was automotive or something, some automotive related distribution, and he was kind of doing it along the same lines. And he wanted to ask questions, and folks like me, if we don't take the time to do that, nothing will change. I mean, and I think that's got to be important. So I'd encourage the listeners here is, if you get these calls from young entrepreneurs like yourself, it's like, take the call.
Yeah.
Take the call, talk to them.
Look, some of the folks who took the call I now consider friends. And
Yeah.
when I say that, they confirm we are indeed friends now. Right. So it's not just in my head, but it's cool. It's just interesting, right? We come from
Sure.
very different worlds, right? At this point,
Right.
I'm sort of a tech guy, right? And talking to some of these folks who just grew up in very different places, very different settings, but really have done extremely well in this industry. I think we, on both sides, just find the relationship, the friendship, just interesting and fun to have, right? Because it's
Yeah.
just like you learn so much about the things that other people are doing and who come from totally different backgrounds and so on.
Those of us in the industry, when we don't take those calls, when we blow those off, or we, oh, I don't have time to do that, or we kind of deny that opportunity, that somebody is going to advance our business. Somebody is going to create the software like you all have, and others out there that will make our lives easier, just because we didn't have time to have a conversation with you, and to share what our pain points are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing to that point too that I will say is I think the significance of the conferences can't be overstated. It's something about just being there in person on the ground. You said it's interesting to you to learn about
Yeah.
how people learn about the industry. Like, there's no substitute for just getting around the people who are in the industry and hearing the things they talk about, the way they talk about them, what is constantly talked about, and what seems kind of marginal, and all those things. I think it's fair, right, that someone maybe will generally ignore cold outreach messages from email or LinkedIn or
Yeah.
whatever. But as humans, right, when you're standing there kind of in person in front of someone, and a beer doesn't hurt, right? Like,
Right.
that really opens up a lot of opportunity. So to the extent that entrepreneurs are listening to this and maybe find this idea helpful, I just think, like, and it's kind of a truism, by the way, in like tech startups, and the wisdom and advice given to entrepreneurs, like, just get around your users and talk to your users.
Yeah,
There's just no substitute for it. And it's really, really true. And I think our business would not exist if not for that.
for sure. It's also a great way to decide you don't want to be in that business very quickly too. I mean, that's a nice,
Yeah.
it's a good way. Years ago, a guy asked, "Hey, why don't you take a look at the recycling business? The carpet recycling business, very niche business." And so I went to this conference, and I realized at the end of the conference, I do not want to be in the carpet recycling business. I mean, it was pretty quick. I mean, but it was good. I think it was worth my time and energy. But no,
There you go.
anyhow, we digress a bit. All right, so you brought in this tool, and you're applying AI to the tool, and we could talk a little bit more about the functionality of Canals. But I think it's kind of interesting looking back at your neuroscience interest, at a much younger age, how that played into now how AI is developing, and there's some synergy there. There's got to be something going on there, at least to pique your
Yeah.
interest.
Yeah. It's funny. There definitely is. I mean, I think I probably grasped some of the key concepts of AI a little more quickly by virtue of my background. But again, if we rewind and I'm thinking about who I was and the things I was thinking about at the time that I was studying neuroscience, like, you just could not have predicted like anything like that I would
Sure.
be working with artificial intelligence, like software, artificial intelligence, like none of it. So it's funny though, but then all of that said, now, right, like I'll see a paper or be exposed to a new concept and it just clicks, I
Mm-hmm.
think, right? And I'm like, oh, I kind of get what that is. And even at the time that I was studying, naturally I mean, this gets a little philosophical, right? But you just, when you start to think about what are we really talking about with the human brain, it's just like a whole bunch of brain cells, neurons that just detect patterns and learn how to react to things out in the world and learn how to do things. And that's what AI is doing too, right? Not quite at the level of the human brain, or, some may disagree with that. And in some contexts, they'd be right. And others, the human brain, I think, is still far ahead. But that's like everything, right? It's just sort of patterns trained into people. At
Mm-hmm.
this point with AI, it's patterns trained into machines. So definitely my academic training there was like foundational and super helpful, I think, into being confident about the approach that I would take with Canals.
Well, I think, and that's so fascinating about AI. I mean, that's that whole wonderment of the pattern recognition and the different in the learning, the machine learning. I mean, for me, it's like it's being in awe, just in awe of this potential power, and a lot of people will fear it, and be
Yeah.
very scared. For me, I'm still very in the awe phase. Maybe I haven't gotten to a fear phase yet, but I'm still like, wow, this is really neat. I don't know where this is going, but it's really neat. So,
I think you're in very good company. I think a lot of folks feel that way, just sort of
yeah.
constantly in awe at what's possible now that wasn't possible just a short period ago. Yeah.
Right, right. Oh yeah, just having a discussion the other day. It's like how close is Chat GPT to current body of information? And as of last release, they're saying that up to I think it's April of 2023 is the knowledge base that they'll claim. I think it's closer than that. That they're just not claiming at this point yet. But yeah, it's just
Yeah,
again,
right.
it's fascinating to me. And then the question is, then when does it cross over to not be hindsight but foresight? That's the kind of interesting leap that you'll see. But again, straying way away from where you are to. Let's step back and talk about the product you developed here, and what are the questions or the needs that you were looking to address that you learned by interviewing different people and going to these conferences?
Yeah. So there are sort of like a few different categories that I bucketed the work into. So in general, what I was doing was just first of all learning like what are even the different departments of these businesses, and then
Mm-hmm.
from a software and problem solving perspective, thinking about those pieces of work in different buckets. And the buckets are, to my mind, the following three. There's like defined tasks or workflows. So these are deciphering and matching type tasks that are defined, but they're not so defined that traditional software will work. And let's please spend a minute on what I mean by traditional software will not work,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's really key for folks to understand like where does software stop and like AI begins, if you do want to think of it in a continuum like that, a technology continuum. But
Yeah.
anyways, so the first bucket, define tasks or workflows. What is that? So those exist across different departments, but think of something like sales order entry. We'll talk about that's our flagship product, but you've got inside sales reps who are receiving emails all day, every day from customers. And the emails are coming in. The customers are asking for a quote or they're placing an order, but the emails are coming in all kinds of different formats. And the data from them needs to be processed into the ERP, right? It's a very specific workflow. It's got a start point and an end point. Similarly, in accounting, you have accounts payable where emails are coming in with invoices and the data from those invoices needs to be entered into the ERP, just like
Mm-hmm.
the data from the customer email and sales order entry needs to be entered into the ERP.
Right.
Accounts receivable, not invoices coming in, payments coming in, and they need to be matched up.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are, again, these sort of defined workflows. Kind of decipher a little bit and do some matching, and then you enter it into a system. That's one bucket. Another bucket is what I would call context heavy judgment. These are types of work that involve processing a bunch of information to make better decisions, because you're using more information than a human could reasonably be expected to keep in working memory. So a good example here is like pricing, right? You could imagine like a really complicated pricing algorithm that takes data from all over, like past prices charged to the customer, prices that current customers are willing to pay or not willing to pay because you're like running these experiments, commodity prices. And at the moment that a human is giving a quote and they have a judgment call to make about how much margin they might try to get for a certain product, you generally don't really expect them to be like crunching all of that information to make the
Right.
optimal quote to give the optimal price at that moment. But what AI does is it lets you process all of that information and then take action on it, right? Because the AI can use all of that context. And similarly, also in this bucket would be procurement, right? So
Yeah.
demand forecasting. Maybe you've heard that Amazon will, just as you look at certain products, they'll start to actually move it in the warehouse. It's a part of how they get stuff to people so fast, same day and all of that, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So similarly in procurement, think about if you have, in theory, you could do this already with software, but you kind of just can't because you would have to create so much code. But what if you could take data about what's coming in the quotes? What are customers requesting?
Hmm.
Right. And looking at historical sales data and what has happened in the past when, this much of a certain type of product was requested, how much of that converted. And then
Hmm.
you look at that against the other context of seasonality and market trends, external factors, economic indicators, right? And you could just do way more with all this information to make better decisions than you reasonably could without AI, let alone without like some really complicated software, right? Like
Hmm.
probably the biggest, most resourced companies like could and do stuff like this without AI,
Yeah.
but AI makes it accessible kind of to everybody.
Hmm.
So that's the second bucket, context heavy judgments. There's a bunch of information that you wish you could bring to bear on a problem, and now AI makes it possible for you to do that. And
Hmm.
then the third bucket is almost like a layer on top of the other two, but it's conversation generation. So, lots of folks by this point are pretty much everybody's familiar with ChatGPT. Well, what does this all mean now? And you can layer on just conversation to ask and have answered questions like this. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of code and a whole bunch of database queries. You could just type in, hey, where's order number 123? Or is this product compatible with this other product, right? And those types of questions, if you think about customer support, will take
Yeah.
up a lot of time because the human has to start doing the digging and finding all the information. It's like they're turning it into a specific question, getting the answer, and then turning that back into conversation, right? But the conversational layer, the generative AI of making all this in the form of a chatbot, a very human like experience, then makes even more accessible the AI tools that live in those first two buckets, right?
Hmm.
Making,
Hmm.
carrying out defined tasks and also making really context heavy judgments. So, as I was to answer your very specific question now, after my roundabout uh, exploration to the
Yeah.
different buckets that I put everything into, having in mind, well, first of all, just learning about like what are the different departments, what are the types of work people are doing, and
Yeah.
then what can you imagine software doing foundationally there, and then what can you imagine AI doing on top of that. That's the process that I was going through to build really high conviction that, yeah, AI can do an enormous amount for these types of problems, for the workflows, for the context heavy judgments.
So one real specific, this is something, and when I was first exposed to your company and kind of learned through my friend Ong, who I've had a long relationship with, he, kind of shared one aspect of just simply handling quotes, this very tedious and cumbersome task that an order entry person or a salesperson is having to go through, and sometimes it's jargon heavy. It could be all kinds, of things that actually wind up bogging down that process, making that process so slow and inefficient. He shared with me how you all are attacking that specific problem. Could you kind of walk us through how your product is handling that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is the perfect vehicle for understanding the difference between software and AI for folks
Great.
who maybe don't
Yeah.
have like a very intuitive sense, right? So, okay, so let's think of this as like a case study.
Okay.
And at the heart of it, like the takeaway, if the audience from me has only one learning about like AI versus software, it's all about rules versus reasoning. Regular software is all about rules, and it's basically just a whole bunch of logic. If this, then that.
Yes.
And every single outcome is predetermined, right? Okay, so let's apply this to sales order entry. So let's say you want to create a software that can turn customers' emails into quotes, right? That's what we're talking about
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So software, right? You need the rules to do that. So let's take an example of where this feels doable with software. So you have a customer who always sends you their orders in the same exact way. The email comes from a specific person. It has an Excel spreadsheet attachment where the first column is the part number that they want. That's your part number. And the second column is the quantity. Okay, feels pretty doable if you have any sense for how software works, right? It's
Sure.
just if this, then that. So there's an email. If it's from this customer, then check for an Excel attachment, right? So far, rules are kind of working. Okay, if there is an Excel attachment, then process it into the ERP. The first column is the part number, and the second column is the quantity, right? So easy enough, right? Send that into the ERP, right? Here's a row. Here's the part number that specifically matches to our database,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then here's the quantity. It's just a number, right? And this pretty much exists. It's EDI basically, but with email, right? So we're like, all right, we feel like we're creating an order entry automation software. And if distributors are listening, they're thinking, well, it gets way more complicated than that.
Right. That's utopia. That is it. It is never going to happen that way. Yeah.
Right. But that's software. Okay.
Yes.
Right. And so that's like that's software. It's just rules, logic, if this, then that. Okay. What's AI? Let's say there's another customer. All right. They also send in Excel attachments. We're just going to change one variable here, and we're just going to see how crazy this gets and how it falls out of software land and very quickly becomes AI land. Okay. So this other customer, they also send Excel attachments, but one variable. They don't use part numbers. Instead, they just use generic descriptions. Okay. So now you have to go from a generic description and the customer's attachment to your specific part number in your ERP if you want to automate this thing, right? Mm-hmm. So now, now there has to be some judgment, right? This is a matching or retrieval problem. Okay. So we have, instead of, let's take the example of 2.5-inch rigid metal conduit. Okay.
Sure.
So that's what's in the first, row for the first product. Okay. And you're like, you could use like search, right? Search is very powerful. Okay. Well, in Google, the number one search result gets like 30% of clicks. So just as a heads up of where this is going, like even Google, the first result is not what the person is looking for 70% of the time. But okay, let's indulge it for a little bit, right? So 2.5-inch rigid metal conduit. So we want to like set up all the rules, the if-then statements. Let's just take 2.5-inch. How many different ways do you think there are to write 2.5-inch?
Oh,
let me tell you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, 2.5, 2 space 1/2, 2-1/2.
Yeah.
You know how many different types of dashes there are, and the 1/2 could be like the tiny font subscript, or it can be just sort of normal 1/2, right? Like that right there just goes on for a while, but you're very ambitious and you're like, I'm going to figure out the logic for the 2.5-inch. Okay. Then there's inch. You could spell it out. You could type IN dot. You could type IN. You could use a double quote, a single quote twice. Okay, that goes on forever, but you're really hungry and you're like, I'm going to crack this. Remember, this is just one product, the first row of this hypothetical spreadsheet, right? And you're just writing all these logical rules. Okay, rigid metal conduit. Well, how many different ways can you say that? You could spell it out. You could abbreviate RMC. Okay, then throw in some typos, right? Like,
sure.
You know, how many rules do we have so far just to like figure out what this product is? A lot, and counting, okay? Because then there's the quantity consideration. Well, what if it's already sold in units of 10 feet and the customer's asking for like 1 or 2? Do they mean 10 or 20 feet? Or do they mean 1 or 2 feet only that they want? Right?
Give me a bundle of it. Yeah.
Give me 2 sticks or 2 feet. Yeah.
Right.
Or what about lengths of? What if the search is for lengths of 2.5-inch rigid metal conduit? Or what if it's for end cap 4 or connection 4? Right? Like, okay, just think about what happened to your logic tree here that you're trying to use to solve this with traditional software. So it's a lot of logic. And maybe it still feels like, it's a big problem, but it's worth it. We'll put together a team of people. We'll code it all up. On the surface, maybe it doesn't seem completely crazy. It might seem like it can be done. I think what you'd find as you started trying, though, is you land in a place of thousands of rules and conflicts between those rules, and just not really possible, or it's going to work only for a few cases, and like the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah. And
that cutoff there from like, you can do it, you can write all the rules, to you kind of just can't write the rules anymore. That's where the AI comes in. And what AI is is you don't code the rules. It's not a whole bunch of if this, then that. You train a model, and that model learns patterns and it can reason, right? Going back to the theme, the takeaway, it's the difference between rules and reasoning. What's really going on here in this string of text? What's the thing that the person is asking for? And that, to get into the nuts and bolts a tiny bit, that's represented, that string, it ends up being represented by a number that's encoding thousands of dimensions, right? And that's what sort of the rules are up against. And you make a quantum leap in terms of what now becomes possible if you can train models where you don't have to write all the rules. You just have to pump through a bunch of examples and training data and refine that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And use these techniques, kind of going back to neuroscience and the human brain, that really do mimic a human learning, where it just, there are these neural networks, all of these machine learning neural networks that are learning to recognize patterns, and they're doing it in a way that you can't really deconstruct. You can't go to the part of the code that explains why you got a certain answer, how the AI knew what the thing was. It's very diffuse, very complicated, again, like the human brain. And so that's, to relate this all back to, canals and order entry, that's an example of what AI can do, what we're doing with AI that wasn't really possible, that isn't possible with the software of yesteryear, because
Yeah.
you just can't, as a practical matter, you just can't code up all the rules and then still have it be workable for like a meaningful share of the cases that it's meant to be working for. So we've moved beyond coded logic. We've
Mm-hmm.
moved beyond those if this, then that type of rules, and into a way more complicated space of reasoning where the outcome is based on patterns and context, not rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and again, in just this very, very simple application of getting quotes. I mean, and I talked before this interview, I shared with a couple of different people that I know that their life is very quote heavy, and that's their business, and they're like, wow, I mean, that is such a cumbersome task, and it is a lot of deciphering. What does this person really mean compared to what is my part number? To get to ERP, there's a big chasm there.
Huge, huge. Yeah.
Yeah,
And we were only talking about figuring out what's the thing they're asking for, right? Then there's the matching.
right,
Okay, I know what you're asking for now, but what's the best match in our product catalog?
right.
That's a whole other stream of applying those same techniques and applying training data and training models to get good at that problem. And this is all still in the realm of, we're still talking this hypothetical second customer, if you remember, they're still using an Excel spreadsheet, right? Where one cell has the thing they're asking for and another cell has the quantity. Now, then move outside of that to just like a text dump in the body of an email or an image of a handwritten list,
Yes.
right? Like this just gets really complicated really fast. And so we joked earlier that in the utopian example we gave
Yeah.
of that spreadsheet, right? Every distributor is listening to say like, yeah, it ain't that simple. Well,
Right.
right. All these other layers are really like where the action is. It's not,
Yeah.
as simple as go from the same spreadsheet every time. So yeah.
Well, I think it is fascinating, and I think one thing people have to recognize is it's not going to instantly recognize that email coming in. It's going to have to take time to learn. Now we can learn much faster than perhaps your human being, but it does take time. So it's not like you turn on your system and hey, everything's awesome. Everything is simple, easy. It's going to take time to learn patterns, recognize patterns, but once it starts cooking, I mean, I think it just expands and expands and expands, and then there's more application going out there.
For sure. You're exactly right. And we see this with our customers, right? Who it does take time, but it doesn't take that much time. In a matter of weeks, if you've got the training data coming in across your business, it really just takes a few weeks for, in the case of sales order entry, the reps to start coming back and saying, like, this thing learns, and it has learned. And every day now I get a few of these lists from this customer, and it's like 25, 50 items, and I'm only picking a handful of them because the model has gotten that confident in what they're asking for, and it's making the selection, it's making the right selection. And now that person who would have spent maybe many hours, right, just sort of going from here's the thing they're asking for, here's the part number, they're freed up.
Yeah.
to do a lot of other high value work.
And you hit, actually, it's a perfect segue, because before I let you go, I really want to talk about the kind of overcoming that fear that AI is going to take my job away.
Yeah.
And I think you just touched on this, that it's going to free you up to do other meaningful work. I mean, I think that's got to be that message that we give.
Yeah, totally, totally. I think, folks who, and I really do think you'll hear this from pretty much everyone who works in AI, you kind of always need a human there in the driver's seat to address nuance and resolve ambiguous cases and bring human judgment to the problem. And so it's not about replace the human because the AI can just do it. And you see some of these crazy examples of chat GPT doing advanced reasoning, and it's natural, I think, that someone's mind could like jump to like, oh no, like
Yeah.
it's all ending. But for what it's worth, from me, one person who works in this technology all day every day, like I don't think it's replacing the humans anytime soon. Like you need, we call it wrangling the AI. Like there's a lot of wrangling that goes on our side to make it accessible and helpful to the human. But then also on the user side, there's a lot of wrangling going on there too. And so, I think it's like a symbiotic relationship. And
Sure.
that's the story for I think the next little while for sure.
Well, and I also think that, it frees up that, and again, I'm just going to pick on the order entry person or the order taker.
Yeah.
It frees them up to actually create relationships and do relationship building, where that is something that is woefully needed, in our organizations, and if they can spend more time on that and have to take the burden of this workflow off so they can do that. I mean, now you're talking about a much more powerful symbiotic relationship between that AI and that human being.
A way better customer experience, right? Because
absolutely,
we know it from the reps that we work with before Canals. They're treading water often day to day. It's like, I've got all these emails coming in. I'm just trying to get through them as fast as I can go. They don't have the time to take a step back and think like, all right, what's really going on with this customer? What's this project they're working on? How can I anticipate their needs? Right. Because you're just like, I've just got to get this quote out to them, or whatever the case may be. And now you are freed up to provide that next level experience. And at the very least, to get the quote back today, not like tomorrow. And that's also very helpful for you and your business too.
Well, yeah, especially like in the construction related fields. I mean, it's all about speed. Everything's about speed. And yeah, today rather than tomorrow, you look a whole lot better.
Sure. Oh yeah. That contractor, what are they worried about is like, I'm going to have these guys on the job site tomorrow and they need.
That's right.
My biggest worry is not, a few dollars here or there on this product. It's like, I need these materials here. Otherwise I'm going to have these guys standing around. Like
I've got a lot of union electricians around here, very expensive people hanging out. So waiting on $100 item. No, it's absolutely the truth. I mean, as I said, I grew up in that world. And so that was drilled into my head a long time ago. So, we've gone a long time and I apologize for keeping you so long on this.
No, not at all.
Fascinating, kind of going through the process. How do people get a hold of you? How do they take a look at your product and get involved with the organization?
Yep. Visit canals.ai. There's a little box at the bottom where you can reach out. You can also reach out to me directly, Michael at canals.ai. We are a very responsive team and we're happy to learn about your business, your needs, your workflows, and explore the opportunity to work together, right? We've covered a number of different tools that AI enables us to offer to distributors. And so all of that is in play and we're very happy to work with more folks. So come on down.
All right. We'll send them your way. We'll definitely put all that stuff in the show notes and get everybody on there. But hey, man, it has been a pleasure. I'm really glad, you were able to take the time and chat with me a little bit. And this is an exciting new world. This is kind of one of my favorite things to talk about. So
the pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider sharing with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcast application. Links to sponsors, products, and services mentioned during this episode can be found in the show description area or at www.distributiontalk.com. Distribution Talk is edited and mixed by the brilliant team at the Creative Imposter Studios. This episode was brought to you by my company, the Distribution Team. We are a consulting services firm dedicated to helping wholesale distribution clients remove barriers to profitability, generate wealth, and achieve personal goals. To learn more about how we can help your company succeed, check us out at www.thedistributionteam.com.